So about a week ago, a friend of mine came up to me and he told me, some synopsis of the plot in his story. And basically, he was scared. Yes, my friend was really scared of what might happen if people read this story. And basically, he wanted to ask me, hey, is this like too much? Is it like too offensive or something like that? And he's a close friend of mine. I don't want to name any names, but generally speaking, an author that I love for the opposite reason is Mark Lawrence, the author of The Broken Empire. Basically, Mark Lawrence does not give a that is really a reason why I love Mark Lawrence, because unlike a lot of people out there who are actually cowering most of the time and they are trying to find a way to sort of angle things so that they don't offend the mobs out there that will cancel them on the first, misstep, deemed misstep by them. Well, Mark Lawrence would not really care about those people. And that's the feeling I got when I was reading Prince of Thorns. And I think it's something I want to do, because there is this belief I have. The artist must do what is required to tell the story. If the artist removes something from the story because they are scared of a backlash, then that is really bad. In my eyes, the artist must do whatever is required. For instance, if you are painting, you must paint the truth. You can paint a lie to get a point across. But at the end of the day, you have to paint such that your painting is the best depiction of whatever you were going for. And I think the same can go for, writing. As an artist, as you are writing your story, you must be able to tell that story with all the requirements that are needed to tell it properly. In other words, if you're trying to depict something, don't hide an uncomfortable reality because it's, technically that's an uncomfortable reality, right? Don't do that. To me, you would be not a proper artist. You would be cowering to the trends and to the sensibilities of your people and your country and your age or your decade or whatever, and your story will not last the test of time. I think Prince of Thorns, it's going to be one of those fantasy books that will outlast everything else. So that's the first reason why I love Mark Lawrence. But the second reason is a lot of fantasy authors are obsessed with relatable characters. I don't really care to relate to your protagonist. I want to understand them. And if your protagonist is just relatable, to me, they're not really advancing anything for me. To me, they are just technically just a copy of me or the least common denominator in society. And that is very, very boring. Mark Lawrence doesn't really suffer from this. His story and his characters, they don't have necessarily likable characters or relatable characters. However, Mark Lawrence does a remarkable job making you understand his character. Do you see that? Do you see the difference here? Like for instance, Jorg Ankrath, I cannot relate to Jorg Ankrath. I haven't had any of the experiences he did, but I understand Jorg Ankrath. And that is the difference, right? A lot of people in the fantasy genre, they always write relatable characters. Some of my favorite authors do it. The issue I seem to have with relatability is there's just too many relatable characters. The whole genre is technically relatable characters. We need less of that. We need more of Jorg Ankrath. We need more of Locke from Lies of Locke Lamora, right? We need these characters that we cannot really relate to the terrible things that they do because we haven't done them ourselves, I hope. But we understand them. We understand why they're doing what they're doing. And that is, I think, a useful skill a writer can have. Moving on, so that's the second reason why I love, Mark Lawrence. But the third reason is how Mark Lawrence has deep ties between his villains and his heroes. A lot of fantasy villains and fantasy protagonists are completely disconnected. Like, for instance, if you take a look at the trope, the generic stuff, right? So there's this Dark Lord and, there's this farm boy. And this Dark Lord wants to destroy the world. This farm boy goes to stop the Dark Lord. So the way this goes is this Dark Lord is really unaware of the existence. Maybe there's a prophecy, whatever. But this Dark Lord does not have any deep ties with the farm boy. And they might have a deep tie in how this farm boy is destined to stop this Dark Lord. But generally speaking, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the villain attacking the weaknesses of the protagonist. If the villain wants to destroy the world, how is that going to attack the protagonist? Like in Wizard's First Rule, there is Darken Ral. He wants to be an all-encompassing dictator. and he wants to have as much power as is possible. How does that attack Richard Cypher? How does that attack the character of Richard Cypher? He does not. In other words, Dark Control is a terrible villain. Okay, and in that particular case, a lot of fantasy villains are terrible because they do not attack the protagonist. But with Mark Lawrence, his protagonist and his antagonist, they attack each other flawlessly. The antagonist will attack the protagonist very well, efficiently, and they will make their life terrible, and the protagonist will attack and try to defend the attack of the villain. By the way, the reason why I'm quiet today, there's a lot of people walking around. Yes, there's a lot of people outside and so on and so forth, so I'm lowering my voice. He is very experimental with his world building. A lot of fantasy authors, they have the cookie cutter world. So they have the kingdom, the empire, or the continents, and of course those are basic stuff. But a lot of the time, the way they structure things, it's not unique, it's not interesting. Take an example, Rorschach from the Stormlight Archive. What Brandon Sanderson does and achieves flawlessly is actually very beautiful, because Rorschach is, first of all, it has very interesting biology. It has, a very interesting looking map, but on top of that, there's like these high storms that go around, and there's a lot of different cultures that all have different beliefs, and these different beliefs come together to create a natural conflict. This is the same with Mark Lawrence. He's a masterful world builder, number one, because his characters and the worlds that they inhabit, it's really not boring. And while Brandon Sanderson and other of the greats are unique in how they construct cultures, there's not really a lot of cultural diversity within the worlds of Mark Lawrence. The way his worlds are unique is the premise. Like in Broken Empire, you have this world that is sort of post-apocalyptic. We have had Armageddon, a nuclear Armageddon, and sort of a war took us back to feudalism. That's very interesting. That's super interesting. I have not really seen that in the fantasy genre. And technically speaking, this is beautiful. More people should be doing this. More people should do this because it really makes your world interesting. The premise for your world, Mark Lawrence just does that very well. Yes, so those are the 4 reasons why I love Mark Lawrence. I hope you enjoyed. Have a nice day.